Hi, welcome to my video. I'm going to analyse the interview of Debbie Hayton that James Max conducted on TalkRADIO on the 30th of December 2021.
Joins me now. Debbie, very good morning to you.
Good morning, James.
Look, there are some who said that I, made an absolute hash of yesterday's discussion. What did I get wrong?
So we start with James Max issuing an apology for getting his entire concept was messed up yesterday. He issues this apology to Debbie Hayton, not to the woman involved.
I get wrong.
Well, I think what you said before about it being a complex issue, in some ways it is, but in some ways it's a very simple issue, that there are two sexes, there are male and there are female.
It's interesting that Debbie Hayton is able to say it's a simple matter and there are two sexes, and he's not immediately accused of bigotry. This is because he's a man.
And what you got wrong was forgetting that and concentrating on something else, which I think is called gender identity, which is unclear and is ethereal, and I think has caused huge damage to trans rights over the past 10 years. We need to refine trans rights in reality, not on this fantasy.
Okay.
Debbie says that what we need to do is redefine trans rights based in reality. The first part of that is to define what you mean by trans. What trans rights are you seeking in society? Which rights accrue to somebody on the basis of a trans identity? How do you define a trans identity? How do you distinguish between an individual who has put a skirt on because he's going out and this is fancy dress, and somebody else who has put a skirt on and believes that this makes them into a female person?
In reality, not on this fantasy.
Okay, so
Says the man who has redefined his entire family around a compelling fantasy, which has been a chronic mental health condition, which in his words became acute at the age of 44.
Okay, so are you telling me then that the people who are defined trans, so say for example, if one goes to the people who are experts, because a lot of...
So James Max here is deferring to the experts in the situation, and I'm assuming that by experts he means an organisation in the third sector that may have issued him with some kind of press release or fact sheet featuring a selection of results from self-selected online surveys, rather than some of the admittedly limited, there hasn't been a lot of research following longitudinal outcomes for people with trans identities, but there have been some very good research protocols. The Swedish study, the long-term transsexual study in Sweden longitudinally followed all of the individuals with that were seeking sex reassignment surgery over a long period of time, I think 30 years. That was a good study. There was a similar study done by Bränström, I think, and that was looking at the mental health outcomes, again using the longitudinal data that Sweden routinely collects. You see, the problem is that if you start to mess with how you collect data, it becomes increasingly difficult to even study a population of people and actually find out if the treatment protocol is working for them. For instance, we know from the Bränström study that there's an elevated risk of suicide attempts in people with a trans identity. And, this is a significant problem for this population of people. For whatever reason, they are making a lot of suicide attempts. So, is what we're doing actually preventing harm, or is it facilitating harm? We need to know. We need the statistics in order to analyse that.
To the people who are experts, because a lot of people will say, look, if you don't feel like you know very much about trans people, they start off, and this is Stonewall, lots of people don't. And the thing is that if you are not something, then you probably, or you don't know something, you probably don't know very much about it. And yesterday, I was trying not to use the wrong language because I don't want to offend people unnecessarily.
This business of language, I don't want to use the wrong language because I don't want to offend people unnecessarily. First of all, it's very offensive to women to use language that implies that there is another way to become a woman other than to be born female and survive to adulthood. Okay, that's incredibly offensive to women. That's a much larger group of people that you are offending when you claim that. Secondly, you know, the control of language is an oppressive tactic, and it is a way of stopping your thoughts. I refer you to the excellent Rohypnol, Pronouns are Rohypnol, blog by Baraka, which I believe is now hosted by Fair Play for Women. Really worthwhile thinking about, why are these battles for language important? Why is it important that we hold the line and that we don't grant compelled speech to certain individuals on the basis of our personal relationships with them? This is fundamental, and it's really important because this is how we do our internal work that helps us to decide how we think about things. That's why the other side has battled so hard to change language. It's really important.
And yesterday, I was trying not to use the wrong language because I don't want to offend people unnecessarily. And I'm not a great expert on trans, but what I do understand is that for a very small number of people, their lives have been made living hell because of the attitudes of others who are very vehement in their views and their opinions on it.
People whose lives have been made a living hell because of the vehement attitudes of others. He's talking about people like J.K. Rowling here, who are attracting a huge amount of abuse because of publicly saying, I believe that sex is real and it has been significant in my life, and I have legally protected rights and I want to protect them. None of that is hateful, none of that is bigoted. That is an expected response when you attempt to redefine women's rights such that you actually remove the rights of women, which again is a very large group that you're offending. So how could my opinions make anybody's life a living hell? It's just such a manipulative, emotionally abusive tactic to accuse women of this, particularly because we are generally sensitive to accusations of causing harm to other people because we are nurturers and because many of us are mothers, and we're very sensitive to wanting to make life better for people. But it's not okay to use this tactic, and we shouldn't fall for it.
Because they don't think it's right or should be allowed.
Well, I think we need to go back to the root cause of this. Go back 10 years and trans people existed. We were fine. We were getting on just fine. And then along comes this ideology that says that we can be whichever sex we like, that trans women are women is its rallying call.
Here Hayton is saying that we were doing perfectly well 10 years ago. Yes, the trans rights movement advanced so far because despite the best efforts of lesbians and radical feminists who were sounding the alarm from the 1970s, they were able to advance without public scrutiny, specifically because they strategized how to capture institutions before starting with any kind of battle for public opinion. So they actually did the political process a backwards way around, whereas women are doing it the other way around because our protestations are coming up from the grassroots and institutions are starting to listen to us. So it's very, very interesting that there's a recognition there that the tactics of the trans rights movement, which was progressing as a juggernaut until 10 years ago when women in the UK managed to actually slow it down, stop it, and in some cases we're starting to reverse it.
So start doing that, people get uncomfortable, people lose confidence in the system, and people start defending their own position. And I do not blame women for defending their own position. If any...
Well, it's very nice that you don't blame women for defending our own position. Thank you very much for that. That's great. I'm glad that we can escape your blame for defending our position.
Blame women for defending their own position. If any man can say, I am a woman, you've got to let me in, then women's boundaries become meaningless. You know.
Absolutely. Dr. Hayton here saying that when a man can say he's a woman and ask to be admitted into spaces, then women-only spaces become meaningless. And this is in fact why there has been such a lot of feminist opposition to this individual, because we have repeatedly asked for our boundaries to be respected. And although Dr. Hayton now says that he doesn't use women's spaces, and that's after years of instances where women have said, no, really, we really don't want you using the toilets at feminist events, for instance, and facing some pushback on that. So always bear in mind that, you know, this is somebody advocating for his interests. This is not somebody advocating for women's interests. He's every right to advocate for his own interests. I mean, that's what living in democracy means, is that we're all able to advocate for our interests, but it's just that we need to be aware that that's what's happening when we're seeing somebody get platformed.
You know, that's plain for everybody
and
to see.
Well, I totally understand that, but then I'm not sure necessarily that that's exactly what trans people are arguing for, but then I get it. But say, for example, how does one then respond? So the stars of Harry Potter have made their statements about all of this. So Daniel Radcliffe, and some would say, well, he's a bloke, so what does he know? But he said, transgender women are women. Any statement to the contrary erases the identity and dignity of trans.
My prediction for 2022 is that trans women are women is going to become another phrase along the lines of born in the wrong body, where we will be progressively gaslighted, that nobody was ever arguing. We were actually saying people were born in the wrong bodies. I believe that in 2022 we will start to see the trans rights movement responding to this political critique and saying, well, nobody said trans women are actually women. You know, we meant, you know, living as women in being treated as women in public accommodations, and they will be attempting to make a strategic withdrawal from that claim to a less politically adventurous claim, which is that trans women really would like to be women, and we would like to be treated as women in terms of the single-sex exemptions in the Equalities Act. And trans rights activists are very, very free to make that claim. And women will vigorously defend our claim, which is that the Equality Act single-sex exemptions are based around sex and not gender identity. And until gender identity is fully defined in law and we have a big public debate about whether it should supersede sex, we would like the position to stay the same as it is now. Thank you very much.
And some would say, well, he's a bloke, so what does he know? But he said, transgender women are women. Any statement to the contrary erases the identity and dignity of transgender people and goes against all advice given by professional healthcare associations who have far more expertise on this subject than either Joe or I. So that was his comment, and I get it, I understand it. Emma Watson, so she says, trans people are who they say they are.
Trans people are who they say they are. Well, you know, this is a nonsense. You know, I could go around saying, my name isn't Claire Jones, my name is Alan Williams. Please treat me as a bloke called Alan Williams for all purposes. Here's a credit card in the name of Alan Williams. I'm absolutely entitled to use it. What do you mean I should not be using a credit card in the name of Alan Williams? No, it's a nonsense. We can't just go through life saying we are what we say we are, because we have a safeguarding, which means that, you know, we check things. We check that, you know, if you're using a credit card in the name of Alan Williams, that you are actually Alan Williams. And that's a good thing, because at some point there's a bloke called Alan Williams who's lost his credit card, who's about to get his flipping bank account drained unless somebody stops it. So it's a nonsense claim that we are who we say we are. And like I say, I believe that we will see a strategic withdrawal from that position to a more defendable position this year.
And Emma Watson, so she says, trans people are who they say they are and deserve to live their lives without being constantly questioned or told that they aren't who they say they are. she wrote, adding to a subsequent tweet, "I want my trans followers to know that I and so many other people around the world see you, respect you, and love you for who you are." So both of those comments are slightly contrary to Jo Rung's explanation, which in large I sort of get, but there are bits of it which I find deeply uncomfortable. But then, why has this become so toxic that we can't have a proper conversation without people being called out? And all the stuff that has arrived at me on the old Twitter is just horrendous.
James Max here is referring to toxicity in terms of the Twitter response from thousands of women who said to him that he was completely wrong and uninformed and ill-equipped to take on this debate. And that is not what makes this debate toxic. It is okay to disagree with people in public. I mean, that's absolutely fine. We are not a totalitarian movement. We are not a totalitarian state. People are free to express their views, and we are big enough and mature enough to accept that there are differences within a movement and there are differences within a society, and that's okay. I mean, for goodness sake, there are differences within every family. We've seen, you know, Brexit and all sorts of other issues divide families up and down the country. We should be big enough to say that people have different opinions. What makes the debate toxic is when people are actually engaging in criminal behaviour, which is issuing threats, issuing harassment, and all sorts of dreadful, very detailed, unwanted sexual harassment, which is faced by women, in particular women with the profile such as J.K. Rowling has. I mean, the abuse she has suffered has been staggering. The abuse that was entered into all the threads where she was collecting the artwork for the Ichabod, and people were sending pornography into these threads of children's artwork. You know, it's completely unacceptable, and women were working really hard to report it all and get it all taken down, but you know, it ruined what was what should have been a really, really warm thing for children during lockdown. So that's an example of toxicity of the debate. It can be unnerving to have a lot of people disagree with you. It can be uncomfortable. But that is actually the downside of having a public profile, is that more people might become aware of your views and disagree with you. You know, that's it. Put your big girl pants on.
But then, why has this become so toxic that we can't have a proper conversation without people being called out, and all the stuff that has arrived at me on the...
Thank you for watching my content today. I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to like or dislike the video. Please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It would be great if you would share my videos on social media, particularly on social media other than Twitter. I use Twitter a lot, at Clarity, but I'm not on other social media really. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care.